Nigeria's aviation sector is faced with myriads of challenges ranging from hikes in jet A1 fuel and airfare, regulatory, institutional, and structural challenges. Challenges of poor infrastructure, poor access to financial incentives, inability to repatriate funds, as well as underfunding of the industry. This is, of course, the first part of the conversation. Plus, agenda setting ahead of new government amid burning economic issues continues to weaken the country's economic outlook. Of course, that will be second part of the conversation where we'll be focusing on implications of that on the economy. And finally, on the program today, oil prices were on track for a hefty weekly loss as economic and interest rate uncertainty weighed, though prices were stable on Friday as the Eurozone recovery gathered pace unexpectedly. Well, this and many more are some of the highlights on the show today. So let's take a moment and we will be right back. Please stay with us. Well, it's the Monday edition, a special edition of the program. Let's begin with some of the top business stories on the program now. Strong indications have emerged that the clamor for the removal of fuel subsidy will not see the light of the day in the current administration, as the federal government confirmed that no date has been fixed for the removal of the price cap on petrol. Speaking at the Nigerian International Energy Summit, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Petroleum Resources, Gabriel Teminu Aduda, maintains that though the federal government is committed to subsidy removal, it's not too specific until every indices have been considered to ensure that the effect is not too hard on the average Nigerian. He adds that the ministry is very serious with subsidy removal and will work on how best to achieve subsidy without disrupting the entire ecosystem of livelihood in Nigeria. And while a few marketers have argued the federal government to provide a clearly outlined roadmap for the removal of subsidy, make provision for forex for import, and to provide a level playing field for all operators by breaking the supply monopoly of the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited. And away from there now, the Nigeria Interbank Settlement System says the value of e-payment transactions rose to 135.52 trillion naira in the first quarter of 2023, representing a 298% increase year-on-year compared to 34.04 trillion naira and the same period last year. The increase in electronic transactions can be attributed to the cash shortage that persisted for more than 2 months, a direct consequence of the Central Bank of Nigeria's Naira redesign policy implementation. According to the NIBSS data, the volume of e-payment transactions surged by 984% to 4.7 billion naira in the first quarter of 2023 from the 433.4 million it recorded in the first quarter of 2022. A breakdown of the report shows that the NIPS instant payment channel had the highest value of transactions with 123.72 trillion naira and the largest volume of transactions with 2.5 billion during the period, while the value of e-payment transactions stood at 42.42 trillion naira in January, but later decreased by 4.3 trillion naira month-on-month basis to 40.6 trillion naira in February, before rising by 34% to 54.5 trillion naira in March. Also, the federal government revenue from rail transaction dropped to 5.57 billion naira in 2022 from 6.03 billion naira recorded in 2021. That's according to the latest report from the Nigeria or National Bureau of Statistics. The NBS in rail transport report disclosed that a total of 2.21 billion naira in revenue was recorded in the first quarter, while 734.5 million naira was recorded in the second quarter of the year 2022. The quarterly breakdown of the revenue shows that the total revenue recorded in the third quarter of 2022 was 994.1 and 1.6 in the last quarter. but the number of rail transport passengers in the payroll rose by 15% to hit about 3.2 compared to the 2.7 million recorded in the 2021, while the total volume of goods cargo for the payroll was 118,587 compared to the 142,438 recorded in 2021. And in terms of revenue generation, 2.07 billion was received from passengers in the first quarter of 2022, higher by 138.82% relative to 892.46 million in the first quarter of 2021. Meanwhile, in the second quarter of 2022, revenue generated from passengers was pegged at 598.73 million naira, a decrease of 44.76% from 1.08 billion naira in the same period of 2021. More so, revenue generated from goods in the second quarter of 2022 amounted to 86.0 million naira, higher by 14.3% compared to 75.21 million naira reported in the second quarter of 2021. And away from there now, let's take a look at the next one. The federal government says it has successfully concessioned the Onitsha port in Anambra, while plans are underway for the concession of other ports across the country. Addressing journalists briefly after a private meeting with President Muhammadu Buhari at the presidential villa, the managing director of the National Inland Waterways Authority, George Mogalo, explains that with such licensing, there will be less pressure on the government, noting that it will also attract more revenue. He adds that discussions are ongoing for the concession of Barrow Port and as well as the Ugota and Lokoja ports that are still under construction in order to reduce pressure on the government. Speaking further, Mogalo disclosed that big ships are expected to berth at Onitsha port soon. The National Assembly Joint Committee on Aviation, headed by Senator Christine Olujimi and Honorable Nolim Naja, has directed the Minister of Aviation, Senator Hadi Sirika, to hold the planned demolition of the offices of the aviation agencies in Lagos. The directive is coming on the heels of the two-day warning strike embarked on by aviation workers' unions, which crippled flight operations across the country on Monday and Tuesday last week. The Joint Committee noted that most of the issues causing the agitations are not new and wondered why they had continued to linger, stressing that some of them have been in contention for years. And while the chairman of the committees of both chambers have also implored the unions to shelve any more actions that will further prevent the smooth running of the sector, promising that their grievances will be duly addressed soonest. Well, those are some of the trending stories now. We take a break, and when we return, we delve into the major issues of the day. We'll be back in a moment. Please stay with us.